Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Big Butterfly Month India talk. Today's talk is on monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies are an insect which has got the longest migration, spanning over generations. Uh, Toshita is going to talk about monarch butterflies today. She's a student with a huge amount of interest in biodiversity and monarch butterflies and is a part of Monarch Watch. Uh, we really do need people like Toshita, to get involved in biodiversity because that is the future. Uh, and Yep, and basic a couple of ground rules. I would request everybody to keep their microphones on mute and the videos off. Any questions that you have, you can put it on chat. I will take it up at the end of the session, and I'll put it across to Toshita, and she'll answer it. And yeah, that's it mostly. So over to you, Toshita.
Hello everyone. Thank you Shantanu for that great introduction. Today I'm going to be talking about, as you already know, monarch butterflies. A short introduction about myself before I start talking about the butterflies themselves. I'm a biology student at the University of Florida. I just started my third year of studies. I love butterflies, I love to read, I love to write, and I was born and raised in Bangalore. And one of my early memories in Bangalore is actually raising caterpillars into butterflies with my father. So my father would bring home caterpillars and we would raise them together. We would collect the leaves, feed the caterpillars, and every day we would have to sort of clean out the boxes that the caterpillars were left in, clean out the old leaves, put in new leaves and things like that. And it was sort of a community event for us. Anytime that we had a caterpillar that had already turned into a chrysalis and was about to emerge, we would actually call over all of our neighbors so that they could come watch the butterflies come out of their chrysalises. And my parents say that the first time I actually saw a butterfly emerge from the chrysalis, I was so elated and so excited and so happy that I cried. I cried tears of happiness at seeing this amazing thing happen. And so my childhood sort of comprised of a lot of rearing butterflies, working with them. Another piece of my childhood that was very important in me for me to fall in love with butterflies was the butterfly meet in Kerala. I went there with my parents, Butterfly India meet, and so that meet was actually, when I think back on it, it was very difficult. So there was a lot of trekking to do. There were leeches, and I hated leeches, and lots of other things that I was not very fond of. But at the end of the day, after everyone would go out and take pictures of all the butterflies that we could see, everyone would come back to where we were staying and they would sort of put up all of the pictures that were taken that day on a projector and discuss what butterflies were seen and things about that. And that environment really increased my understanding of butterflies and also helped me fall in love with butterflies even more. And when I was about 9, we moved from Bangalore to Kansas in the United States. And that's where I got involved with Monarch Watch. And my introduction to Monarch Watch came through an event that they have annually in about May. So it's a spring event. And every year they have an event called Open House, which is a sort of tour of their headquarters along with other things. So here on the left, you can see an image taken in their headquarters. So they have breeding cages for the monarch butterflies that they use. So that's one of those cages that has butterflies that can mate and then lay eggs. And then they also have other fun events, like they have games that you can play that are related to butterflies. So there's a match the pollinator and stuff like that. They also have other insects on display that you can see. So I know that they've had some lizards and geckos in the past. They've had different spiders, antlions, things like that. And here on the right, you can actually see a display about different plants and flowers and things like that. So that was my first introduction to Monarch Watch. And another feature of the open house is they have almost ready to emerge chrysalises put up, and you can just watch a butterfly emerge from the chrysalis. So right here is an image of a monarch that has very recently emerged from its chrysalis, which is why its wings are sort of folded and it looks very small. And then over here is that butterfly after it has rested for a while and extended its wings. Another really cool feature of the open house is they have this area that you can actually hold a caterpillar. So not many people have ever held a caterpillar, and it's a very interesting sensation. So if you do have the chance and you find a caterpillar that you know is not harmful, I would definitely recommend holding it. So over here we have a picture of a few people looking at those caterpillars, and those caterpillars can just be picked up and held in your hand. They're very soft, they tickle a little bit, but it's a lot of fun. Especially to see kids holding caterpillars for the first time, and that's one thing that this open house manages to introduce children to. Another thing is they have this sort of open air cage with different species of butterflies that you can just sort of go in, look at, take pictures of, and things like that. And if you're lucky enough, you get graced with a butterfly that chooses to sit on you. So that's this picture right here. And so I was wandering around this event with my parents, going around, playing the games, holding caterpillars. And when I entered the butterfly cage, I was confronted with a very interesting sight. So this is what I saw. And I was a little shocked because I'd never believed in Santa Claus, and this man here could have been him. And secondly, even with my at that time limited knowledge of butterflies, I knew that putting butterflies in your mouth was a bad idea. That was just a very good way to hurt them. However, here was this guy putting these butterflies in his mouth, pretending to eat them. So this is Audley Taylor. He's fondly known as Chip. He's a professor at the University of Kansas, and he's also the founder of Monarch Watch. So Monarch Watch at this event, I realized, was a perfect fit for me because I had grown up raising caterpillars and butterflies, and that was one of the main things that they do. And I was so interested in working with them and joining them is that I actually went up to one of the people who used to work there. Her name is Anne Ryan, and I asked her how I could help them during this event. So as I mentioned already, Monarch Watch is an organization that works with Monarch organization, and their main goals are education, conservation, and research. However, Monarch Watch is not the only organization that works with monarchs. There are many, many organizations, and this is just one of them. And I was just lucky enough to be in the University of Kansas, which Monarch Watch is associated with, and thus I was able to work with them. So a little bit about the monarch. The monarch butterfly has a life cycle. It starts off with the adult butterflies mating. And after they mate, the female butterfly lays eggs. These eggs are very, very small. And when the eggs hatch, you have this really small first instar caterpillar down here. And so instars are just stages in a caterpillar's life. And so as you can see here, a monarch butterfly has 5 instars. And so the way you differentiate between each instar is the caterpillar comes out of the egg and then it eats, and once it has eaten enough, what it actually does is it molts. So it sort of like a snake sheds its skin and is now bigger and has a new skin. And as you can see, there are slight color changes as the butterfly continues to shed and molt its skin. So once the butterfly goes from a first instar to a 5th instar, the 5th instar is now a caterpillar that is ready to pupate. So it is ready to form a chrysalis. And once it has eaten everything that it thinks it needs to eat, it leaves the plant that it's on and goes on a hunt for a good place to make its chrysalis. And so This is the picture of a chrysalis. And so the way the chrysalis process works is the the caterpillar heads out and finds a good place. Generally, it's generally a horizontal surface like this. And what it does is it attaches its back, so its hind legs, to the area that it's going to pupate, and it has silk there, so it attaches through the silk, and then it hangs in this sort of curved formation like this. So it's called a J shape. So it's a J like that, and it hangs there, and then when it's ready to pupate, it turns into a chrysalis, and then a few days later, that chrysalis emerges as an adult butterfly, and the cycle continues on. So here's a little more about the monarch. So the host plant is milkweed. You've probably seen milkweed in India. It's the plant when if you take the leaves and you break it, it oozes this sort of white substance. And the life expectancy of a monarch is 2 weeks to 9 months. So I'm talking about monarchs specifically in North America right now. However, monarchs are not exclusive to North America, as you can see from this distribution map from iNaturalist. There are some monarchs that are found in Europe, and there are also some monarchs that are found in Australia. And monarchs are, even though they are found in Europe and Australia, not much is known about their migration distances. Not much is known about their migration. And the little that is known, the distances are not as large as the ones in North America. So I am going to be focusing this talk on my experience working with the North American monarchs. So some of you may have noticed that the monarch actually looks very similar to another butterfly that is seen in India, which is the striped tiger. So these two are so similar that, in fact, early colonial scientists who came to India and were collecting butterflies and such actually misnamed the striped tiger in their collection as the monarch. So this leads to the question, what makes monarchs so special? It has been slightly covered. They do migrate. So it has one of the longest migrations of any insect. They travel from Canada to Mexico every year to get away from the winter cold conditions in the north. And this migration is very special because it makes these butterflies very sturdy. So to be able to go that distance, which is approximately 3,000 miles, or I believe that's 4,800 kilometers, that makes these butterflies very strong and sturdy compared to some of the other butterflies, which is why in those earlier pictures, you could see that Chip was able to hold them, put them in his mouth without actually harming them. So the sturdiness factor is what allows Chip to do that. So I'm going to go over the migration cycle really quick to start off. These green arrows are northward migration. So northward migration generally starts in March and continues on until the end of summer. And the yellow arrow, orange yellow arrows here are southward migration. So that's when winter is starting and the weather is starting to get colder and colder and colder. Also, these blue areas are overwintering sites. As you can see, there are 3 in North America. So to go over migration, the first thing to note is that the same individual monarch butterfly does not complete the whole migration. So for example, let's say we have a monarch in Texas down here in the month of March. What this butterfly will do is it will mate and lay eggs. And as it mates and lays eggs, the weather will get better, time will go on. And so the growth of milkweed will start to increase northward. So here in this area, this green area, that's generally where milkweed grows in the springtime. And then this yellow area is generally where milkweed grows in the summer. So as milkweed continues to grow farther and farther north, these butterflies just follow the growth of that milkweed. So because it's a sort of slow process that the butterflies are following the growth of milkweed, they're mating and laying eggs and so on, this journey from Mexico to Canada takes 2 to 3 generations to complete. And once that journey is complete, the fourth generation, the generation that is born in Canada, is nicknamed the super generation. And the reason it's the super generation is because that generation is the generation that makes the big journey from Canada to Mexico. So because they have to make such a long journey, they do have an unusually long life expectancy of 8 to 9 months, which is why the general life expectancy of a monarch is, as I mentioned earlier, 2 weeks to 9 months. Another thing that is important here is that here you can see the Rocky Mountains. They are some of the largest mountains in the United States, and they actually separate the population of monarchs into an eastern side and a western side. However, these two populations are not genetically distinct. They do intermix, and the way that happens is you have monarchs that come down here to overwinter in Mexico. Some of them actually come from the western side of the Rockies. Some of them, of course, overwinter in California. And so they come down and they mix over here. And sometimes you can have butterflies that came from the eastern side to overwinter. They can, when they're heading north, they end up heading north to the western side. And so there is genetic mixing between the two sides, the two populations on the two sides of the Rockies. So as I mentioned, most of them do overwinter in Mexico, and their overwintering sites have very specific conditions. And a really interesting story that illustrates the specificity of these conditions is the story of how this site was, how this overwintering site was discovered. So Dr. Fred Urquhart spent 40 years looking for the overwintering site, and after 40 years, he finally found it. And he published his discovery of finding the overwintering site in National Geographic. However, he didn't specify a location. He didn't specify it in his article. He wouldn't tell anyone who asked him. So he was very quiet about it. He wouldn't tell anyone. However, there were two geographic clues in the article that he published. The first was that the site was in the state of Michoacan, which is a state in Mexico. And the second was that the site was at an elevation of 10,000 feet. And based on these two very generalized clues, Dr. Lincoln Brower and Dr. Bill Calvert were able to just look at a map and pinpoint a location. So the specificity of the conditions for overwintering is very high. And so if you're interested in learning more about the discovery of the overwintering sites, I would definitely recommend watching Flight of the Butterflies. It's a wonderfully made documentary that goes into more detail about discovering the overwintering sites. So in Mexico, once all of the butterflies have reached the overwintering site, it is quite cold there. So even though it's not as cold as, say, Canada, it is quite cold. And what they do is they huddle together on these trees in a behavior known as roosting. And this behavior allows them to conserve energy. So there are thousands and thousands of butterflies all just packed tightly next to each other on the same tree. And there are occasionally so many butterflies. The weight of these combined butterflies has known to cause trees and tree branches to bend over and sometimes break. And so this overwintering site is actually quite a popular tourist attraction. And because of my interest in butterflies, my parents' interest in butterflies, we actually managed to take a trip to this overwintering site. And so here are some pictures from the trip. The way you access that area is, it's up in the mountains. So you do have to drive up. And then once you get, there's sort of this base camp area where they have some restaurants, some stores that you can buy memorabilia. So that's where I got my monarch earrings and things like that. And then once you reach that area, you do have to sort of hike up into the mountains until you can get to the area where the monarchs generally overwinter. And one thing that people who go there are hoping and praying for is for a little bit of sunlight. So the reason that people go there and wait for sunlight is that when the sunlight shines through, the butterflies who are sort of just sitting there because it's cold get warm, and when they get warm they have enough energy to fly around. And I was actually lucky enough to witness this. They fly around, and sometimes you have so many butterflies flying around you that it feels like you're just in a tornado of monarch butterflies. It's amazing, it's mind blowing, and if you can, I would definitely say go check it out. So now that we know about what makes monarchs so special, their migration, let's talk a little bit about how Monarch Watch actually works with these butterflies. As you already know, one of Monarch Watch's goals is conservation. So they're working to conserve monarch habitat, and the reason that monarch habitat is declining is because a lot of it, most of it actually, is on agricultural land. So it gets sprayed with pesticides, and these pesticides then kill the monarchs. So Monarch Watch's solution to this problem is a program known as Monarch Way Stations. Monarch Way Stations it gives you guidelines on how to build a butterfly garden to specifically attract monarchs. So it has specifications on how big it should be, what ratios of, say, host plants, so native milkweed you should have versus native nectaring flowers, and things of that nature. And then once you do build your butterfly garden, there is an application that you can fill out to get certified as a Monarch Way Station. And when you get certified as a Monarch Way Station, they give you this beautiful sign that you can actually put up in your garden that says that this garden is a certified Monarch Way Station. So Monarch Way Stations help both butterflies that are traveling from the north to the south and butterflies that are traveling from the south to the north, as they have both host plants, milkweeds, for the butterflies that are moving northward to lay eggs on, as well as flowering plants for butterflies that are moving southward to sort of fuel up with nectar and things like that. Another goal of Monarch Watch is research. And the most extensive research project that they're working on is their tagging research project. This project began in 1992, and it was initially started to learn more about their monarch migrations. And so the way the tagging program works is that super generation butterflies, those are the butterflies that travel from Canada to Mexico, are caught and they are tagged, and they're tagged with a small sticker. The sticker has a identifying code, and it is specifically placed right here on a cell that is known as the discal cell. And these tags do not harm the butterfly in any way. They don't imbalance the butterfly, so it doesn't stop them from being able to fly or things like that. The butterfly is very safe with all of this. And so the person who has caught the butterfly places the tag on the butterfly, and they also record data about the butterfly that they placed the tag on. So the date that they caught the butterfly, the number on the tag, the sex of the butterfly, the location that they caught the butterfly on. And some people also who frequently rear butterflies, they also tag all of their reared butterflies and release them. So there is you do have to specify when you're recording whether this monarch was caught in the wild or if it was released by you. And so even though this program was started in 1992 and a lot more is known about the monarch migration, this program still continues today because it helps answer questions about the timing of migration, which can change from year to year. It answers questions about how successful these butterflies are in getting to Mexico. So that's how they sort of get the data about whether or not they need more way stations and things of that nature. And also other interesting things like the relationship between where they were caught and whether or not they reached Mexico, the relationship of whether reared butterflies are more successful in getting to Mexico versus wild butterflies and things of that nature. So here is just another picture of the tag. So as you can see, there is contact information for if you find the tag. So if you find the tag, you are asked to contact Monarch Watch and give them details about in what condition you found the butterfly, where you found the butterfly, when you found the butterfly, and this can be added to their data. They also have, this is the unique identifying code, as you can see. And so this research project has an associated educational event, and this event is known as the Monarch Watch Tagging Event. It takes place annually in September, and it teaches people three main things. The first thing it teaches people is how to catch a butterfly with a net. So the tip on this is you approach the butterfly very slowly, and then when you get close enough, you have to move quickly so that they don't realize they're there. It also teaches people how to identify the butterfly and then how to tag the butterfly and write down the documentation of those tags. And it also teaches people more about migration. So people can come talk to volunteers and people who work at Monarch Watch, learn more about migration and things of that nature. So here is a few pictures. This is actually a butterfly that I tagged, and when we released it, it decided to hang around on these flowers. So we were able to get that picture. And here is a picture of, I think this was the first butterfly that we got that day. And so I'm writing down sort of the information. So I have the date, the gender, and things of that nature. So another research project that Monarch Watch is involved in is the use of artificial diet. So Chip Taylor actually refined an artificial diet for monarch caterpillars. And the groundbreaking thing about this diet is that it allows caterpillars to be raised even when fresh milkweed is not available. So especially in the winter when plants are not able to survive, this is what allows Monarch Watch to keep their in-house population healthy and growing. And so the process for making this diet is, first you have to harvest the milkweed. So as you can see here in this picture, we have basically a car full of milkweed that has been harvested. And once it's harvested, the milkweed has to be cleaned. So what we generally do is we take a big tub with water, put the milkweed in there, and once it is cleaned, the leaves do have to be separated from the stem because the stem is not used as a part of the diet. And once the leaves have been separated and cleaned, the leaves are then placed out to dry, and once they dry, the leaves are powdered, and these powdered leaves are mixed with a bunch of other ingredients to make the diet. And so the diet is made in a liquid fashion. So this used to be one of my main jobs as a volunteer with Monarch Watch. So it does start off in a liquid form, and it is poured into reusable cups. So the process generally starts with you lay out all of the cups that you're going to use, so in sort of a grid so that you can pour quickly. Then you make the diet, you pour the diet into. Once you've poured the diet into the cups, you do have to wait for a little bit so that the liquid can set and form a gelatinous substance, I would say. And so once that is set, you can transfer caterpillars into those cups, and the caterpillars can then just start eating the diet. And so after these cups have caterpillars in them, the diet does need to be changed every few days. It can't last forever. So once you have a caterpillar in there that has been there for a few days, you do have to transfer it into a new cup, and the old cup needs to be cleaned because usually there is remaining diet as well as frass or caterpillar poop in the cup. So that's what I'm doing over here on the right, is cleaning some of the cups from the diet. And so this diet is what made this next research project of Monarch Watch possible. And that research project is Monarchs in Space. And so monarch butterflies caterpillars were sent to space. And the reason that they wanted to send these caterpillars to space is because monarchs are believed, they're thought to be dependent on gravity. So this is seen in two behaviors. The first is that if you ever have monarch caterpillars on plants, they do always tend to go upwards towards the top to find their leaves rather than staying down below near the base of the plant. And the second thing is uh, every time that a monarch pupates, it specifically pupates on a horizontal surface. So you never see them sideways on anything like that. It has to be a surface like this where they're hanging off of it. And so 3 caterpillars were sent in 2009 from, in 2009, more than 3 caterpillars were sent from Monarch Watch. And so over here in the picture, you can see us holding some of the caterpillars that actually went to the Kennedy Space Center. And there in the Kennedy Space Center, they selected 3 of the best caterpillars and put them on top of the space shuttle. And these caterpillars were sent with enough diet to last them for their last instar. So they were 4th instar caterpillars, and so they only needed to get 5th instar caterpillars. And so Atlantis, the space shuttle, launched, and once it launched, it got connected with the International Space Station. So here on the right is a picture of the astronaut Bob Thirsk. He's actually installing the chamber with the caterpillars into the space station in front of the cameras that were live streaming everything that the caterpillars did. And so these 3 caterpillars spent about 20 to 25 days on the International Space Station. So they started off as 4th instars, they molted and turned into 5th instars. They then pupated and emerged on the space station, and then a few days later they died. So the overall conclusions from the Monarchs in Space project was that monarchs do respond to gravity, and they do need gravitational cues to to pupate. So they do need gravity to when they're going from a larva to a butterfly. And so this research project actually led to many new questions about monarchs. And one of the most obvious and biggest questions is, how do these larvae and adults sense gravity? And where is their sensor located? Do they have the same sensor throughout their lives, or does the sensor change? Do they lose their sensor when they're in a pupa and grow a new sensor as they're turning into a butterfly? And more questions like that. So this project, the Monarchs in Space project, also doubled as an educational project. And so the way this educational project worked is that about 400 classrooms and families bought these kits known as rearing kits. So a rearing kit is a kit with about 15 caterpillars that can be bought and then transferred onto your own milkweed plants, and you can raise these caterpillars. And so anybody who bought these rearing kits during this time was encouraged to compare the growth of their own caterpillars to the growth of the caterpillars aboard the space station. So sort of use their at-home caterpillars as a control to the experimental group that was aboard the space station. And the cool thing about these rearing kits is that they are not exclusive to the Monarchs in Space project. They still continue to send them out to classrooms and families today. And so it really teaches children about the butterfly life cycle and how butterflies grow. And so here I just have a poster of the Monarchs in Space project. As you can see, here is a picture of Chip Taylor holding the caterpillars that were being sent to the space station. Here is that picture of Bob Thirsk again. Here we have a picture with a few kids with posters while you can see the Atlantis launch in the background. This is what Atlantis looks like. We have some at-home projects of caterpillars at home and in the classroom. And so just a poster that looks at the Monarchs in Space project. And so I worked with Monarch Watch for 6 years, and 6 years, and I almost went 3 or 4 times a week during those 6 years. And so I spent quite a bit of my time with Monarch Watch. And so during these 6 years, there are some very big things that I learned, things that highlight my experience with Monarch Watch. And one of those is a much better understanding of butterflies. I did have a sort of base knowledge when I grew up because my father used to raise caterpillars with me. But working with Monarch Watch really exposed me to more things that can be done with monarch with butterflies, more knowledge about what different butterflies do, and things of that nature. It also it made me realize the amazingly positive and just the overwhelming impact that regular people can have. So the tagging program by Monarch Watch is a huge event, and every year they send out tags to hundreds of thousands of people in America. And so even if each person does tag 3 or 4 butterflies, the data that is collected from that is huge. And so the smallest contributions to science, even by people who aren't scientists, can go a really long way in helping scientists understand the world. So my experience with Monarch Watch also inspired me to continue working in the field of biology, just staying around all of those butterflies and all of that natural stuff. I realized that it is what I love, and that's what I want to continue doing. And the fourth thing that I was able to take away from this experience is that I made so many friends. Anybody that I would meet during these events, things like that, we had instantly had a connection, and I was able to talk to them. And so I am still in touch with quite a lot of people from my Monarch Watch days. So you're probably wondering, this is great, but Monarch Watch is an American organization and we're all in India. So what can we do? There are a few things that you can do. The first thing is take inspiration from the Monarch Way Stations program and create your own butterfly garden. There is an upcoming talk about this by Dr. Raju Kasame that you can check out on how to create your own butterfly garden. And you not only get to see butterflies in these gardens, but other beautiful insects. So if you do have the space and the means, I would definitely recommend that you do make a butterfly garden. And so here is just a quick poster on his talk. And another thing that you can do is you can rear butterflies at home. It helps introduce butterflies into children's lives at a young age, and it helps them learn a lot about butterflies, about the natural world, and who knows, it might even inspire them to become scientists one day. So that is one thing that that Monarch Watch does, is that it introduces children to caterpillars, to butterflies through their open houses, through their tagging event, and it inspires them to continue working in whatever way they can to help biodiversity. Another thing that you can do is you can observe your local butterflies. Observe those butterflies, observe those migrations, take pictures of any butterflies that you see, post them on biodiversity portals, because even one picture of a specific butterfly in a specific place can be of immeasurable value to a scientist. Small contributions that go a long way. So if you're interested in learning more about Indian butterfly migrations, there is an interesting talk coming up by Dr. Kailash Sadasivan, and here is a poster for that. And finally, I would just like to acknowledge a few people before I end my talk. The first people that I would like to acknowledge is all of you, my audience. Thank you so much for coming and taking the time to attend my talk. Secondly, I would like to thank the Big Butterfly Month organizers for inviting me to give this talk. And I would like to thank Monarch Watch, specifically Chip Taylor, Anne Ryan, and Jim Lovett for letting me work with them for so many years. And finally, I would like to acknowledge my parents, Narayani Barve and Vijay Barve. So thank you. That's my talk for today. And if you have any questions, I'm ready to take them at this time.
Thank you, Toshida. That was a really beautiful talk. We got to know a lot of things. I'm sure your audience would be really, enriched by the knowledge that you have shared. And I can see from a lot of people the minds ticking away and how the structured way that monarchs and are being monitored, how that can be brought into the Indian butterfly context. And taking lessons and learnings from Monarch Watch, if something like that can be done out here, and study the butterflies out here. Yes, that is something that is very interesting. Couple of questions have come up, if I may share. Sangeeta Jain has got two questions. One is that what is the best time to go to the overwintering sites in Mexico?
So the best time to go to the overwintering sites is in the winter. So I would say November, December, January, when it's cold pretty much everywhere else in North America, but relatively less cold in Mexico. So so I would say at the height of winter would be the best time to visit those overwintering sites.
Okay. Is there any structural differences between monarch and striped tiger?
That's a great question. As far as I know, there aren't any structural differences. Most of their differences come from the patterns of their wings and that sort of thing.
Okay. Whether the super generation of monarchs, which live up to about 9 months, has any other differences in morphology than other monarchs? Anish.
They don't. They generally they can be a little bigger in size, but other than that, they have no differences.
We had said monarch is one of the longest migrating insects. So Nagaraj is saying that not the wandering glider, the dragonfly is the longest migrating insect in the world and not monarch butterflies. So
Yeah, so it's not the longest. There are actually two that I know off the top of my head that are longer. The dragonflies, as were mentioned, that go from Africa to India. And there's also the painted ladies that migrate from Europe to Africa. However, the thing that makes monarch migration is special is it has been known for the longest time. So both the dragonflies and the painted ladies are relatively recent discoveries compared to monarch migration. And secondly, the level of monarch migration in terms of numbers and the swarms that you can see migrating is much larger than the painted ladies. So easier to notice monarchs migrating than it is to see these painted ladies migrating.
Okay. Shaila wants to know, can you please clarify how the butterflies in space behave differently from those on Earth?
So the butterflies in space actually did not behave much differently. They did struggle a little bit to find good places to pupate because they did not have a sense of gravity, so they did not know what was the horizontal surface. And I did talk about this briefly, but when a butterfly emerges, its wings are folded, and then it has to sort of pump this fluid into their wings to extend them. And that was one thing that the monarchs aboard the space station had the biggest amount of trouble with, is pumping that liquid into their wings, because generally when they're on Earth, they do hang in such a way that it sort of allows gravity to do some of the work for them. So one of the butterflies in the space station actually did end up with a slightly deformed wing due to this.
Okay, how long does it take for the butterfly to reach Mexico?
So it takes about 2 to 3 weeks for the butterfly to go from Canada to Mexico.
Okay, so around 20-21 days.
Yeah, a little more, a little less. There are always variations,
Yep.
exceptions.
Some laggards and some fast flyers.
Exactly.
Okay, do painted ladies also have multi-generational migration?
Uh, I am not sure if they have multi-general migration or not, but that is a great question.
Okay, then Bhushan Sate in Facebook asked if the same generation of monarch doesn't reach destination, then why is this phenomenon called as migration?
Because it is a migration. They start in one place. So one generation does go the whole distance. That is the super generation. They start in Canada and they go down to Mexico, and they usually also come back up a little to Texas. But the south to north journey is multi-generational. And I'm pretty sure that there are many other animal species that migrate who do migrate specifically to a location to mate, and then it is the next generation that makes the journey back. So it is not a hard and fast rule that the same individual has to make the full generation migrational cycle.
Uh, Hanish has a question, and I got a rejoinder to that question. In addition to that question, Hanish asked whether wind flow affect the migration, whether monarchs use wind streams to move easily. And my question is that how do they determine the direction in which to migrate?
Okay, so they do use wind streams to migrate, and wind has been known, especially storms, have been known to disorient and confuse monarchs that are migrating. So wind does play a big factor, and a lot is not known about exactly how they find the location that they're trying to go to. There are several experiments that have been done. Some have been thinking that it's the magnetic field. Some are thinking that it has to do with their personal circadian rhythms, and sort of they use the sun as directionality. But there is no definite conclusion in how exactly they know where to go.
A lot of thank you messages for you, a lot of love being sent over by people. Some was saying this is a lifetime migration lecture, enjoyed. I envy you, love
Thank
you.
you.
This was a wonderful talk. The ISS thing was super interesting to a lot of people. Uh,
Yeah, I think that was one of my favorite Monarch Watch projects.
when they overwinter in California, do they roost in the same way as in Mexico, Shaila?
Yes, they do. They do roost in the same way. However, they do roost on a different species of tree, and those overwintering sites are much smaller compared to the ones in Mexico.
Yeah, I think I have finished off my set of questions out here. If anybody has any questions, they can unmute themselves and walk right now, ask right now, or else we can end up this session.
So I had, sorry, this is Shaila
Yeah,
here.
hi.
Hi. I had one more question for her. Actually, the third site, was it in Florida in North America, the overwintering site?
There is a third overwintering site in Florida. However, it's not really a site because once you get to the southern part of Florida, the weather, even in December, is very good. So rather than it being a roosting site or an overwintering site, they sort of just come down there, hang out for a bit, and then when the weather gets better, they fly back up north.
They fly back. So then the only difference would be that perhaps you would see many more monarchs in the winter in that particular area. Is that what it ends up being? I mean, they're still moving and feeding and doing everything.
Yeah. I don't know. I do know that I don't believe that the numbers are that significantly changed. It's just that as more milkweed grows, the population also grows and spreads until it's heading towards Canada.
Okay, thank you so much. And if one does get to go to California, would you see the same kind of numbers as you do in Mexico, even though the sites are smaller?
Yeah, you'll definitely see the same numbers in terms of like on the tree
Concentration, yeah.
concentration, because they do have to stay warm. However, it may just be like 2 or 3 trees, while in Mexico there are 2 or 3 sites where they have hundreds of trees that are just filled with monarchs. So Most of the monarchs do end up in Mexico.
Oh, lovely. And sorry, just one last question. When I had gone to Houston and I was very, very keen in March to sort of see this. And I was wondering if I should go to Mexico or if the migration had started and if it was possible for me to maybe see them in Texas at that time. But I could not find anything in, on the net to let me know what exactly was happening. I probably didn't know where to look. And also when I read up on Mexico, I was told that, to check about whether it was dangerous to go to these sites or not. So is there anything like that? I mean, is there politics or?
It's not really much of a problem to go there. People do it all the time. It is mostly just Mexican people that do travel to these sites. However, it is not rare to see people from all over the world at these sites. And in terms of the March migration, you were talking about the butterflies coming back from Mexico. So the thing that happens is when they're coming from the north to the south, as they start getting closer and closer to the overwintering site, they do become sort of more social and they do try to spend more time together. So that's why you can see the big streams of butterflies flying down to Mexico. However, when they leave Mexico, they don't always exhibit this behavior. And so you can't really see the big numbers of monarchs flying. It's just a few here, a few there, and it's not as noticeable as they're coming back.
Okay. Thank you so much, Toshita. That was really lovely. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Toshita, we got a question on Facebook by Bhushan Sathe. He asks, what is the size of the tagging sticker? And is there any special glue used for pasting it?
So the size, I believe it's like a centimeter or a centimeter and a half in diameter, and there is a specific glue used as to not harm the butterflies too much, but to be enduring enough to stay through all of their tough life. I'm sorry, I don't know the formula for the glue for obvious reasons.
But it does not stick on, right? It gets removed by itself. How long does it stick onto the butterfly?
It stays on for the entire life of the butterfly.
Okay. Dr. Rekha Deshmukh has a question that there is currently California is having a blazing fire. What is its impact on such migration?
Yeah, so that is one thing that the entire monarch community is actually very worried about, because with all of the smoke and things like that, there are worries that a lot of these butterflies that are going to start migrating soon to California are going to either die because of the smoke, die because of the fires, not be able to find the right spots. The right spots might have been burnt to the ground. And so there are worries about that monarch population actually decreasing on that side because of the effects of these fires. So no one actually knows exactly what's going to happen, but hopefully the fires do die down, are put into control, and then we'll have results in December when people start doing counts at those overwintering sites.
I hope that answers your question, Dr. Deshmukh. Do we have any more questions? Or maybe we can end the session here. Thank you once again, Toshita. Thank you for the wonderful talk. And hope to hear from you more about monarchs sooner. Hello? Hello? Yeah, as I was saying, so thank you for the wonderful talk. And
thank you so much for having me.
And good night, everybody, and good morning, Toshita. So, well, if you can end the session now.